Today, I'm going to be sharing with you all why I feel Calgary could be the next Toronto or Vancouver. So this may sound like a pretty bold claim given that at the end of the day, at least in my opinion, Calgary is still significantly behind Toronto or Vancouver relative to what I call city development. And I have said this in the past that I still feel that actually living in Calgary still feels more similar to, say, Winnipeg than it does living in a metropolitan city of Toronto or Vancouver. But with that being said, there's still a lot of potential in the city of Calgary. That is one of the reasons why I decided to move back to Calgary would make sense for me long term. Let's be frank for a quick second, no pun intended. If I felt that the trajectory of Calgary would be, let's say, more similar to my home city of Winnipeg, then I likely wouldn't have made the move back here. I probably would have just stayed in Toronto, to be honest. But obviously there are some promising developments in Calgary, some key factors as to why I felt that it would be the next Toronto or Vancouver. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about Calgary's population growth, the housing market, Canada's rise of cost of living, and Calgary's expanding food scene that have led to my conclusion. I'm going to be breaking down exactly why I feel that this is so, and if you're enjoying what you're hearing so far, I would appreciate if you guys could do me a quick favor, smash the like button, the subscribe button, follow me on Instagram if you haven't done so already, and now let's get into some of the reasons why I feel that Calgary will be the next Toronto or Vancouver. Let's start things off with Calgary's rapid population growth. As of July 1st in 2023, there are 1.68 million people living in Calgary and the surrounding areas. This number was approximately 100K from the previous year. And if you'd like to take a look at this annual population growth, looking when COVID started in 2020, year over year was 1.67%, then it was 0.8% increase, then in 2022 it was a 3% increase, and then in 2023 we had the largest growth at 6%. So you may be asking, what exactly occurred in recent years? Well, let's take a look at some of the contributing factors, which was the infamous Alberta is Calling campaign that began in August 2022 under former Premier Jason Kenney to address the labor shortages in Alberta. This, if you remember, was a campaign targeting other provinces of Canada, primarily British Columbia, Ontario, to consider packing their bags and moving out to Alberta, where housing and commuting was supposed to be cut in half. And to be fair, I thought it was marketed pretty well. Like, I remember being in Toronto, seeing this campaign plastered everywhere in the Toronto subway station. Like, everywhere you went around that phase one, you would see billboards to basically reconsider moving your lifestyle, leaving behind this rapid hustle grind that exists out in Toronto, and move out to Alberta where things were promised to be easier. But guess what? You could even make the argument that it worked, because 2 years after moving to Toronto, I found myself eventually moving back to where I am right now, in Calgary. And you might be asking, how exactly did this campaign play out? Well, according to Global News, Alberta achieved a record-breaking net interprovincial migration gain of 55,107 people in 2023, and it was the highest in Canadian history for a single year. Now, of course, living in Calgary, I've actually met a lot of people who were, I guess you could say, sickened by this campaign. But believe it or not, it actually wasn't the interprovincial migration where majority of the population growth in Calgary came from. The majority actually came from permanent immigration and temporary international residents, as seen on this chart over here. Next, let's talk about Calgary's blooming housing market. And I'm pretty sure if you ask locals in Calgary about the housing situation, many likely would share that prices have gone up significantly within the last 5 years. And they're right. I don't blame them, and let me reveal to you the breakdown of the average home in Calgary over the last 5 years. So here's a chart that I pulled from Korea, and as you can see, back in 2021, the average home price was around 411K. Then in 2022 had the greatest year-over-year change of around 16.7%, and that number jumped to 480,500. Then in 2023, we saw another increase to 506K. Then 2024, another increase to 550K. And then currently, as of 2025, we're sitting at 570K. Now, it's sort of hilarious because I know a lot of realtors in this industry will probably look at these numbers over the last 5 years and make what I call a unreasonable prediction, and probably tell clients of theirs and be like,
well, it's going to be $1 million real soon.
And I'm not the biggest fan of that mindset, because over the last 5 years, we're seeing one of the fastest year-over-year changes but that doesn't necessarily translate to this being consistent year over year. I always tell people that sure, data suggests that it is increasing at a faster rate than usual, but I'm not comfortable putting my hand over my heart and suggesting that it's going to be like this year over year, even the following year. However, I can say that if you do hold on to your home for the next 7 to 10 years, then I'm more comfortable to put my hand on my heart and say yeah, if you do that, then it's very likely you'll be up from when you first bought it. At least what I can say as of right now, whether I'm talking to my friends or family or even clients, that definitely, as of right now, your dollar stretches a lot further out in Calgary and in Alberta than it does in Toronto or in Vancouver. It's almost kind of crazy when you actually see the homes in Calgary in person, because I'm sure if you're coming from out of province or you're on just realtor.ca, for example, and you're looking at how much you can afford with a $500K budget, and let's just say you're coming from Toronto or Vancouver, you're often kind of wow, I can get this townhouse at this modern looking new place in comparison to this 1-bedroom condo in my city that may or may not be in a sketchy area. Next, let's talk about the rise of cost of living in Canada. So similar to the rise of real estate increasing year over year, it was actually shared by Stats Canada that nearly half of Canadians report that rising prices are greatly impacting their ability to meet day-to-day expenses. And to get further into it, younger adults are experiencing greater financial difficulty and are more concerned about rising prices between the ages of 25 to 44. And so the reality is that many young adults are looking for answers, myself included. Even I had to step back and thought living and affording to live in a city like Toronto or Vancouver could be nice, but I found myself struggling and worrying about affordability in the long term. And it's not to say that it's impossible to live out there. I've seen how people can afford living there working multiple jobs, whether that's serving, Ubering, or cutting their rent by living with a roommate or a partner. But they're scrapping by, I find, oftentimes or not. It's sort of interesting because I have noticed this trend, and I know this is a big generalization. However, I have noticed that people in their early 20s, you thrive off the big cities, and rightfully so. You're kind of dumb, you have no experience, and cities like Toronto, Vancouver, or Montreal are great options to develop your skills in the workforce or just even go to school. However, after you spend I say a decade or so in the workforce, you start to just realize for the most part that a job is a job and that your salary, at least in Canada, pretty much stays within a certain range. And you begin to know how expensive or unaffordable these big cities are. And you may want to start slowing down. Hence, cities like Calgary may start to look a little more intriguing. Let's now talk about Calgary's food scene, and no disrespect, but it doesn't even come close to Toronto in terms of quality. I get that this is subjective, but it's funny because when I ask locals what they think about their restaurant scene, the responses remind me more of, let's say, Winnipeg. I'll hear things like,
"Oh, Frank, did you hear about Boston Pizza? It's so lit." Or, "Holy cow, they're opening a ramen shop on 17th? Damn."
And I'm just like, really? That being said, I have to admit, there is hope, serious hope, for Calgary's food scene. I have noticed that some of my favorite Toronto spots, whether that's Kintan Ramen or Katsuya, just to name some of my favorite few, are opening up in Calgary, which is such a relief. They're not the most central locations yet, but the fact that they are opening here tells me that they're making moves. If Toronto's food scene is, let's say, a 10 out of 10, I'd say Calgary has places that could be on that level, but overall it's sitting at a solid 7 out of 10. It passes, but it's missing that extra, kick. I do have to give credit where it's due. Even since when I moved back to Calgary in 2020, I will say that the food scene has changed a lot, and for the better. As someone who loves Korean food, I've noticed the large increase in Korean restaurants. This may be influenced by the global rise of K-culture in general, but it's pretty wild to see that it's happening even in a city that's often referred to as the Texas of Canada. So is Calgary behind Toronto or Vancouver when it comes to overall food options? 100%. But I do feel that it's changing very, very rapidly. As more people move here from cities like Toronto or in Vancouver, Montreal, or whatever, I feel like they're bringing their knowledge, their experience into the food industry. And I'm confident that Calgary's food scene will only get better from here. All right, enough of my rambling. Let's get into the big question of it all, and that is Calgary the next Toronto or Vancouver? And if you ask me, yes, I know I'm biased, I'd say probably. Otherwise, let's be real, I probably wouldn't have made the decision to move here in the first place. When you look at how much prices have gone up over the last 5 years, it certainly does seem like Calgary is headed in that direction. But let's be honest, nothing is guaranteed, and just as fast prices can go up, they can also come down just as fast as well. And remember, don't let any realtor, friend, or even myself convince you that prices will only go up and that you should buy every piece of real estate that you can get your hands on. The reality is there's enough evidence out there showing that becoming a landlord and owning multiple properties is not a guaranteed path to financial freedom. In fact, I'd even argue that simply investing in an index fund like the S&P 500, which historically returns about 8% per year, is a safer and more predictable bet than real estate. But hey, that's just my opinion. So with that said, that's my take whether Calgary is the next Toronto or Vancouver. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment section down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I guess I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.